Let's take a look at your final part of your finals, project three, the display poster. So a couple of things. Again, I think for the most part, people use the templates. There's a few people that didn't. If we didn't use the template, then we need to make sure that we are. Um, there's a couple of things with the template I can show you as well. But again, I'm going to be a little bit picky, right? There we go. Our files need to be saved as last name underscore origins, where there's two Taylors. Um, we can use an initial for like Dante and Joshua. You can have like last name D, last name J for your file, just to differentiate it. It doesn't happen very often, but it happens to me every so often. We have people with the same last name, just add a first initial, no big deal. Let's talk first about the zone information, and then I'll get into your projects. You can see here that Zinnia used the zone because you can see the outline of the green one. I mentioned it briefly in class, but we can rearrange our layer ordering a little bit just to kind of clean it up and give yourself a better view of those actual outlines. So you can see there's one here, one here, one here. They're in layer one, so they're kind of behind information in your zone layer. So if you'd like, you can select, or I would like you to select these three paths and you can move them up into the zone information layer. And then now you see, oh, you have the image, okay. Now you'll see that you have all of your zone information and then you can just kind of hide that if you want. Um, I'm not sure why. Well, anyway, we'll get into it when I talk about Zinnias. But this way you can see, you can see your zone information and all that good stuff. So yeah, again, if you're not using the template, you need to make sure that you're using the template, and then move those zone guides um, to the proper layers so that you can see your zones here. All right. Let's take a look at Zinnias here. So you can see we have a nice clean layout. There's a couple little things that I would potentially suggest here. I might think about either making this smaller or having it on this side. Let's see where your zone is here. I'm just going to move them up in this layer so we don't get, there we go. Yeah, I would definitely, kind of tuck this up into the give or take upper right hand corner, maybe even make it a little bit smaller because again, these are going to print theoretically. They're going to print fairly large, so you can kind of give it a little bit of breathing space. Um, I like the idea, I like the image. I think the bottom is a little bit heavy. So what I might do is one of the things I might do, um, using your direct selection tool, when you have a rounded rectangle, resizing it can be tricky unless you have your resized corners. But what I generally like to do is I kind of will direct select just either the bottom corners or the side corners that I would like to adjust. Like in this case, I just want those bottom four, now the right four, and I would have it overlap so that it kind of gets sort of buried behind there, and then make that box much smaller, and then kind of play around with the location where you're happy with it. I wouldn't have it exactly line up there, but maybe you know depending on how big you make that box, depending on how big you make the image, you can even kind of tuck this even further right a little bit, um, just to give it a little bit of movement. So the reason I would move the logo here and then kind of move these down again, you can kind of play around with the placement with where you like it. But I like, well, anyway, I'm getting off topic. So to kind of give that like flow left to right reading, right? In the West, we're kind of trained to read left to right. So you have the Origins logo that's going to give visual attention, and then you have this, kind of looking at either his head or the logo, and then the way the image is, his arm and the axe kind of brings you down and then back almost in like the Z kind of formation to read. It's a very good uh, movement in your layout just by creating a couple of simple elements. I might even make this just a tiny bit smaller, give or take, play around with the sizing of it. Um, again, really yours is going to be more kind of playing around with the sizing of this and this element, seeing where you want that, where you want that overlap to be. You kind of had that hint of an overlap there, and I really like that. Those are usually strong. Again, they create more dynamic layouts. They're usually strong layouts. Having that giant box of, the green space was kind of cluttering it a little bit when you could kind of simplify and then have a little bit more, a little more visual overlap. And again, kind of think of the rule of thirds ish, give or take, with where you have, this element with the product element, but I really like this layout. A couple of clean, simple changes to finalize this one, I think would work really well. The only last thing I might try is if they have a bold, well, black might be too much, but hmm, play around, black condensed maybe, and then play around with your tracking. You don't want to like huge, but yeah, not so much. So that's your rather that's your not your tracking, that's your here's your tracking. Just to give it a little space, tracking and kerning. I'm not digging that as I change it. It's a little bit too bold. Um, yeah, I guess there's not really, well, there's a bold. That's not too bad. I might go with the bolder font. One of the tricks you can do is when you're looking at something like this, you're going to kind of see it off in a distance. So, it still reads pretty well. You can kind of see how well something is going to read just by zooming out, or sometimes like I have terrible vision, so I take my glasses off and I see how it looks blurry if I can still kind of not super legibly make it out, but if it's like visually sort of legible, if that kind of makes sense. But yeah, I think a couple of changes with this, I think will tighten it up really well. All right, we'll go to Reese's now. There it is. We'll go to Reese's. And you have your, oh, that's an image. Okay. Oh yeah, because you exported it as a JPEG. Look at that. Okay. So I'm an illustrator, but um, so what I might do for yours is I might make this guy a lot smaller. I kind of like the idea of it. Um, to be honest, um, unless you pulled that, I'm not sure if you did, unless you pulled that from their website directly, I wouldn't use something like that. Um, unless that's sort of like a nod to an actual origins thing. Um, so what I might do is remove him, and then that way, your headline there is kind of buried a little bit, right? So a strong scent for a strong guy, that will give you, an option to put it like here. So even if you had like a strong scent, and then for a strong guy, kind of offset. Um, so I spell it right. I'm just kind of like arbitrarily doing this with random font, but strong guy. Obviously change the font a little bit, but if you had this kind of like step, you know, this sort of step-ish kind of thing, this gives you a bit more room to play around with that, um, and play around with the products. Um, if you get rid of him, even if you had the Origins logo down here, small, like in the corner, um, I might actually swap this sizing for this and vice versa. So you have the bottle here, and then the smaller, maybe a little bit smaller than this, the smaller orange bottle here, or even if you had the soap product here. But yeah, I would potentially, definitely make this smaller. See if you can tuck it in the corner here, or see if it'll fit relatively well down here without it being super cluttered, and then move the text from here down to here, even if you had it up a little bit higher, depending what you did with the logo down here. So I think yours is going to be kind of organizing a little bit, getting rid of Josh there again, unless he's an actual nod to the company, moving the text from this location down below, and then kind of resizing this area here. I think could finish this off really well. Going to David's. Let's see. Right there. All right, so we'll take a look. It's a little bit blurry. I'm not sure. This is the JPEG, right? Oh no, that's an AI. Okay. So I think that image you might want to find, unless I'm missing it and it just kind of replaced it oddly. I'll take a look on your machine. Um, and then let's see if you're using the template. Yep. So I'm just going to move this up just so we can see. There we go. So you want to make sure that you're within that safe zone here with your text and stuff. Um, I might honestly make this a little bit smaller, right? So make our guy a little bit smaller, have him come right to the bleed there. You can even have him come to the safe. Um, even, oops, tuck him more in the corner there. And you could have the logo, down in the bottom left. Um, and then maybe make these images. Oh, they didn't link for me for some reason, so I'm just making them a little bit smaller, and then that way it sort of gives you room to free these up just a little bit. I might, and I kind of like how you have. Why did I? I kind of like how you have. There we go. How you have the text that's sort of like punctuated. Don't be gross. Um, I might just have that on two lines here, so you don't have that awkward space. I just got rid of. Oops. I'm gonna go back a couple steps because I got. Oh, I see. I did it as area type by accident. That's what happened. There we go. There we go. So I moved them over. Don't be gross. Um, there we go. And then fit that in the upper right or left-ish rather. And then that kind of gives you a little bit of room here. I might edit this down. Um, or see if you can get this on maybe it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5 lines. See if you can get it on 4 lines or even 3 lines, just to see is this an area type? No. Just to see, maybe edit it, word it differently so it's a little bit shorter, or play with the sizing because again, these are going to print fairly large. So see if you can get it to give or take, you know, a couple of lines. Oops. Give or take, just so it's not so kind of like visually cluttered, right? Um, I might simplify that a little bit. I might take the drop shadow off that. It's a little drop shadow heavy with the drop shadow here, drop shadow here, drop shadow here. I might lose a drop shadow on that and maybe go with a different color. Maybe go with the color of the Origins logo just to tie it together. Um, Potentially a different font here. Depending on what you want it to do, that font is um, you don't want to go with something. I like the idea of something like relatively simple, but maybe something with, you don't want to go like too silly, but you don't want to, because this does have some humor to it, right? So you don't want to be like too silly, but something with a little bit more personality, you know what I mean? And yeah, simplifying this, and then we want to make sure that we're copying and pasting the logo because it's a vector file in there, so that way you can pull the color from it if you want to use it, or when you resize it, you don't have to worry about pixelating when you have it in your file. All right, going to Mackenzie's here. There we go. All right. So this one, I really like your image, and I like the placement. I think maybe edit down your product list a little bit. Maybe include one of these bottles because you have, two similar shapes. Um, might be a little bit much. See what it looks like with, one of those bottles out of there, one or two products out of there, just so it's not so cluttered there. And then that'll give you a little bit of room to play. I was gonna see about, I'm not sure how much room you have with our guy here, even if you kind of tuck them more to the left. Yeah, maybe not so much. I was trying to see if you could tuck them to the left a little bit and then give yourself space for the Origins logo. You might even be able to make that a little bit smaller because again, these are going to print much larger. Um, and you could even get that right inside that corner. I think what you're going to be working on for the most part is, your text, right? So this is a lot of text. Um, so I think wording yours, look and smell your best. I might have, look and smell your best up here, and then even in the toughest conditions, separated down here, maybe not so much. Um, I mean, you can still kind of stylize like that, but just make it smaller. Um, and then I'm not sure that you need that, or even like maybe really small. See how it'll look, but um, if you move these up a little bit and then have like down here, maybe like one line or something, all new, all new skincare products, specifically for men or something like that if you wanted to have a line down there. But see if you'll need it at all after you resize and revamp this a little bit. It's just a little bit text heavy. I think yours is going to be physically editing and then also editing your size and kind of maybe getting like a headline, sub headline, and then maybe one line about new products from them. But I think with having the guy hiking kind of gives that male audience already. So I think for you it's going to be like resizing slightly, splitting the difference maybe over here, and again just kind of editing down verbally and visually that area so it looks a little bit cleaner. All right, let's look at Erika's. There we go. Um, So I like this image. I think the image works well, relatively. And I say relatively, the only reason I say that is because, there's kind of no indication that this is a product line for men. So that's like the target audience, right? So we want to keep in mind that target audience. You wouldn't necessarily need to change the image, right? Um, because you could sort of change the kind of target audience with what text you're going to use, right? So I think for you, if you're going to use the same product, maybe just one image of the same product instead of three images of the same. I had to replace images so that you might have three different images, but they are kind of like sort of floating in this area, right? Um, so if we had, I'm just going to move these. Um, so you can do one of two things, and you already kind of have images here. One idea is depending on what products you're going to use, if you kind of wanted to have, not to make them look like they were resting on you know, on that basin or on the bath, you could kind of arrange so that, you kind of cover that up a little bit. If obviously if we were in like sort of a more pro environment, they'd probably have their own photographer, their own shots. But depending on what products you are using, I'm thinking maybe kind of place them around here, give or take, so they're not just kind of like floating on the wall there. And then your headline is what's going to be what if you're going to use this image, your headline is what's going to sort of change that or relate to more directly to the target audience, right? This speaks more directly to um, a general audience. You could even have, if you wanted to have this in the middle of your layout, um, would be totally fine because it doesn't necessarily, your picture is a little bit off to the right, which is good. So it's not going to look dead center anyway. So having that create a little bit of visual dynamics, even if you kind of want to somewhat center it in this area. But I think for you, it's going to be kind of messing around with the types of products that you're going to use. Even if you had three products just kind of like stacked over here specifically to cover these two. And then changing your headline to more directly relate to a male audience. Again, this is if you were to use this background. If you change your background, obviously it changes pretty much 99% of your design. But I think you can make this design work just by, whether it's humorous or relatively more serious. I think just by sort of creating a different headline, you could make this work for a target male audience. All right, let's check out Naya's. So I like the idea of this one. You have this kind of like, yin yang-ish thing going on here. And then the water to obviously imply that it's, bath or bathroom stuff. Um, I think what I might try is maybe even just one splash here, and then having, maybe engineered for men here, and then take this splash out. So you're getting rid of this splash and getting rid of this splash, and then you have um, design for skin, or vice versa, design for skin, engineered for men. Either way, so that way you have it a little bit more separated, and then you could kind of move the origins logo um, either here or here. See which one you like best. But I think overall, and maybe making this image a little bit bigger. I might even try. Um, may or may not work, but I might even try having this image, break one of these boxes so they're kind of like offset a little bit, and then have the other one, offset on this side, just to give it a try. But I think this one is pretty strong. The positive negative space works really well. The sort of near complementary colors work well. Um, again, I think losing this, and then separating your headline text, like headline, tagline, playing with where you want to put your origins logo, and kind of having these, maybe this one bust out on this side and this one bust out on this side, just to give it a little bit more. You have some good overlapping going on, just to give that like overlap with the product a little bit more, and also sort of like showcase the product a bit more. But I think overall it's a really strong start. All right, let's check out Connor's here. Here we go. All right, so this one, I kind of like the idea. Well, I should say, I do like the idea. Your image, right? So I'm going to, okay, I'm going to copy that, paste in front. I'm going to clip that so we don't have. There we go. So it looks like you're not using the template. So you want to make sure that you're using that template, right? So this way we don't have this giant artboard in here. Well, it's also a JPEG, so I can't really see it. But anyway, so what I might do is, oops, I might see about moving this, not quite half, obviously. Or I shouldn't say obviously, but give it a little bit, the background image there, give it a little bit more, um, if you can, even if you flip the image, if you can see, if you can give it a little bit more, just a bit of that green sort of poking out. Um, and then um, I like the idea of your headline. I'm thinking um, made from Earth, or mm, born from the Earth, made for man, or man-made Earthborn is pretty decent. I might use a stronger font with that. And what I would do is I would make this logo much smaller. Um, and then you can kind of basically use what you have left of this space as a guide to kind of center your stuff within here. And then you're also going to have to keep in mind your safe zone and your bleed and trim and all that fun stuff too. But I think maybe even if you had, lastly, if you had three products, even a little bit overlapped or close to overlapped, had three products here, and then had like, Earthborn or Earthborn, and then three products on this side, man-made, or vice versa. If you had the products, words, products, word, and then you could make this logo a little bit smaller and kind of in the middle of this space, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Um, So yeah, I kind of think that'll give it a little bit more movement, right? You already have this nice sort of offset design, but I think creating a little bit of movement left to right and right to left at the top and the bottom might make this work a bit more. All right, let's check out Wilbur's. Okay. Okay, so I think a couple of things here. I think one, I like your image, I like your overall design, but I think we're running into a similar issue that some people have that, there's not necessarily, this is more for like a general, I sort of read this as a general target audience rather than, relating to a male audience that we're going for, except for the save the males, but that's, super small. People might not even read that. Um, what I might do is if you have enough room with this image, I might make this image a little bit smaller, so you can bring that down a little bit, um, and then have the products maybe a little bit closer together, and then you're almost getting there with that sort of overlap on your horizon, but I would push that right so that the horizon line breaks, give or take, there, right? Having that overlap is a nice effect, right? And then you can play with placement, having that Origins logo small bottom right or small bottom left. And I think your headline, this is where you can work on, having a headline that appeals more directly to a male audience, right? You have a ton of space here. Even if you brought it down, not quite thirds, but even if you brought it down a little bit, so it wasn't so close to the top. But yeah, I think yours kind of rearranging your products a little bit, seeing if you can move that the background down, to give that overlap, really push and accentuate that overlap, making your logo a little bit smaller and tucking it in either into the bottom right or left corner, I think could finish this up really well. All right, and we're checking out Ivory's. There we go. So this one I think is a really strong idea. I think, some minor tweaking here. The logo is a little bit hard to read. You can certainly change the color of the logo. Again, it's an Illustrator file, so you can copy and paste from Illustrator. And if you wanted to pull sort of a lighter color from, one of the products, or even just from your, if you want, oops, it's not there. If you wanted to make, an off-white-ish so that that pops out a little bit more. Um, so it doesn't quite get buried there. Um, and then I might edit your products. They're kind of a bit cluttered here. Um, Potentially, I thought of maybe swapping, or depending on how you edit these objects. If you had a few, kind of in this area, so you kind of had your, give or take your products here, and then you could have your design just for men here, or even have this just a little bit smaller, and then have your products and your design just for men at the bottom. So I think for yours, it's going to be some minor tweaks, changing the color of your logo, editing your images a little bit, cutting them down a few, and arranging them a little bit differently. And then I think maybe little to no change to that, but just maybe tweaking that, seeing if it might work in another place. Again, if you used the soap as the bottom right, you might be able to fit designed just for men there and have it sort of all kind of tucked in the bottom corner there. All right, looking at Nina's. There we go. It was a really cool idea. I think without seeing the full image, if you want this blue to go to the edge like everything else, then you need to have it go to the edge. It kind of doesn't look like, because it looks like you have a white frame there. So it looks like you want that white border, which is fine. So you want that white border all around, which is totally fine to do. So, but again, if you wanted to have a bleed, then you need to have a bleed. But it looks like you set it up so that you have a white border around the whole thing. Um, So what I might do is with yours, I don't know if it's the export, we could take a look at it. Um, but I might move this up a bit, maybe not right up against the top, but definitely further up, maybe start it, give or take, up here. And then you can kind of move your freshness up just slightly, and then move your origin soap there up just a little bit, basically just kind of shift everything up this way. Um, And then I might pick a more sort of simplified font with this. It does kind of get a little bit lost in that background. I think it might have to do with the drop shadow as well. We can see if we can lighten this background a little bit. That texture is the texture is a little bit heavy, um, so it kind of obviously throws it off visually. There's a couple of different things we can try, or you can try, is if you wanted to make a shape that was white, um, that basically went over top of this, and then you could play with the opacity. Start with like 10% opacity, and then bring it up and up and up and up. Or you could play with your blending modes, or even just lightening the image itself in Photoshop and replacing it. But I think a way to start and eyeball it is to kind of overlay a white shape and then play with the opacity of that. And that'll give you, you know, if you find 20% opacity on a white shape, if you're in Photoshop and you lighten the image a bit, then 80%, lighten your image 80% there. So that way the opacity is a little bit less. So I think that might make it pop out a little bit. And again, I might go with a little bit of a cleaner font, or if you use this font, a little bit bold. Um, or even maybe nod to this font a little bit. But that might make this pop out a little bit more, and then the logo pop out a little bit more, or even go with a, sort of an off-white logo, just so it doesn't drop out so much. But overall, I think it's a really good concept, and I think it's a really strong design. All right, Josh Taylor. There we go. Okay, so I replaced my image, and for whatever reason, my image oops, has this doesn't it's not using the clipping path for some reason, so we're not going to worry about it. I wonder if it's in. Nope, never mind. Let's come back. Anyway, so yeah, I know yours doesn't have that. That's just because I replaced the wrong image and I don't feel like changing it. So for you, what I might do is move this logo somewhere else, um, and maybe see, depending on how much room you had with that image, maybe even see if you can make this image a little bit bigger to give yourself a little bit more space. Oops, space at the top there. It doesn't do a whole lot. But I was going to see if you could kind of have this more on one line or stylize it a little bit more. Um, even if you had this, the only burn you don't want to feel. Um, play with the headline a little bit, play with your font, maybe a bolder, more interesting font there, just to give it a little bit more sort of movement, if that's the right word. And then you can kind of make this product just a tiny bit bigger, and then kind of tuck it right in this corner here. I like the idea of, the beach image and your headline image, and then we're talking about sunscreen. Um, and then I think moving your logo bottom left or bottom right rather, as I said the wrong color. And again, this is an Illustrator file, so we're going to be copying and pasting rather than placing. So this way we can change the color. So I might work on changing the color of it, maybe a lighter green, or a darker color, just so it stands out a little bit more. I think could go, a long way with this, or even having it, if you did have it in the upper, still keep it in the upper left. Um, I was wondering how. No, but I might play around with, even if you had it on two separate lines. I'm going to cut that. Even if you had it on two separate lines, and you could kind of move it, give or take. Yeah, I feel like that's like a little bit cluttered up top. Yeah, I might stick with having it down lower, or even lower in the image itself. But even if you kind of space this a little bit more, just to give it a little bit more movement, right? And then kind of play around with placement of your logo, see if you like it there, with a different color, see if you like it here. But I think kind of moving things around a little bit, and then, going with a more bold font, I think would go a long way with finishing this up. All right, let's go with Laney's here. Let's back out a little bit. Um, so I think for this, I like this concept a lot. I think although these do print pretty large, I think this does, these are a little bit small. Again, I really like the concept of it. I think maybe editing a little bit to where we have, you know, a few of these images, and then we can make, or a few of the product images rather, and then you can make those overall a little bit bigger. I would definitely make this a little bit larger here. Make your origins logo a little bit smaller and sort of tuck it into this corner. Give or take maybe about, let's say that's your logo. So, smaller in that bottom corner. And then kind of either, score with the newest. I'm trying to think of a way to edit that down to maybe like one line. So like score with the newest organic men's skincare lineup. And then you have that on one line or even like one or two lines here just to like sort of declutter a little bit. So that way if you have your text and your image kind of in the bottom here, that frees you up to make these a little bit bigger. If you edit out some of these images, if you decided to go from instead of, go from this one to this one to this one to this one, oops, to this one, and then use this squiggle and go to this one and then this one. And that way they're a little bit bigger. Obviously this is going to print, or theoretically it's going to print larger, but I think that, it kind of gets lost here a little bit. Some of the products get a little bit lost. So I think simplifying your products, being able to make them bigger, and then kind of editing this to like one, maybe two lines down in this area, I think would go a really long way. I think it's a really strong concept, and I think it's a really strong start of a design. Okay, then Nathaniel. There you go. This one's really simple in a good way. Clean and simple works very well sometimes. I might make this a little bit bigger or a lot of it bigger. And you can kind of even tuck it in the bottom right. You want to make sure, yeah, you want to make sure that you're using the template. I'm not sure that you are using the template. It looks like I thought your zones were a little bit off, but yeah, I might kind of tuck that in the more bottom right corner, make it a little bit bigger. And then for you, I think it's going to be, maybe moving this up a little bit and then moving up the logo a bit. This one isn't going to be very much, I think, to usually if we go to 24 point, let's say, I think yours having a lot more, I know it's not technically white, but that negative space, that white space, I think for you having more white space than you think is gonna help sort of finish this off. Even if you made this a little bit smaller, let's scale so I know exactly how small. So let's try 90%, preview it. Sometimes 10% or 15% goes a long way. 85, it might be a little small. But give it, I think this one, give it some breathing room, right? Give it that white space. Um, and you'll kind of eyeball that space where it's not that this is cluttered, but where this has a lot of texture, a lot of, illustrative value, the product and everything. It's a little bit busier. The top part is a lot cleaner. I think giving it that room to breathe a bit might help. And then let's see, make sure that's centered in your document there. But yeah, I think for you, it's just going to be kind of resizing this area, giving it that lots of that free space or that negative space, and then moving this into the sort of bottom right corner, making it a bit bigger. And lastly, making sure we're using that template. I think transferring this to the template is going to be pretty easy. I don't think it's going to be difficult at all for you to sort of reformat this to the actual template, which is in the assignment materials. But I think overall this is an awesome start, and I think some minor tweaks to finish it off.